Welcome back, DFF Army. Billy Beeman here. You can catch me on Twitter at WillyBeemanDFF. Back with another draft review. I did a bunch of mock draft reviews. I think you guys enjoyed those. Now I'm going to do a startup draft review. We're basically in startup season. We've done our rookie drafts. Now we're looking for new dynasties to join, right? So really excited to get into a couple of the startups that I've done and just highlight a little bit of kind of the strategy that I use to navigate the current landscape. Some of just the highlights, talking about hero or zero running back strategy, a lot of people are familiar with, but I think I take it to a little bit of a different level, and we'll get into that. Also, transition periods, I'm going to talk about those. If you don't know what those are, I've actually talked about these before. I will and should be able to link those in this video, either in the video or in the description, maybe both. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about draft position, right? Where you're selecting from in the draft, 1 through 12 or 14 or 16 or however large your league size is. So want to get into that. I just completed 2 different 12-team startups. One was a Devi draft. One was just a Dynasty draft. Both were actually 32 rounds. One was with the DFF crew. A bunch of us got together and did a Dynasty Devi startup, and it was a pretty exciting draft. And then another one is just a bunch of really good friends, some really good competitors who are really into Dynasty. And I think these are both good drafts that I can go through to give you an example of how I would navigate the current landscape of Dynasty. So let's just dive right into it. Okay, so real quick here, I'm not going to be able to show you the entire draft board on this screen, so I'm just going to let you see an overview of it here. I have been drafting from the back end of the draft a lot, the 111, 112 spot. This is with a bunch of our writers and staff members from Dynasty Football Factories, so it's a really competitive draft. Obviously, we're all trying to really beat each other, and that is my ultimate goal. So I want to kind of highlight how I did this, right? And I guess the first thing I can start with here is talking about draft position a little bit. So a big part of what I've noticed is that I do really well from the back end of the draft. I think I really like having double picks, back-to-back picks, or close to it. The 111 is similar to me, but I really, really don't like having to wait from like the 106, 7, 8 spot in here where, it just takes a while to get back to your next pick. One thing I've been playing around with a little bit, and I'm workshopping this, I would like to do a little research by the numbers, but I have a feeling that it might all even out in the end. So what I'm talking about here is, again, picking at the turn, right? Whether you're at the beginning, whether it's the first overall pick, second overall pick, or 11th or 12th overall pick, where you get nearly back-to-back picks. And I do think the back end, the 12th area, may be a little bit more beneficial than the first pick because, again, you have to wait so long to get back to your first set of back-to-back picks, which is like the 212 and the 301, right? But nonetheless, I think that it's really advantageous getting 2 top-end players back-to-back at the end of the first round who have, top 12 potential. Obviously, there's only 12 players, but they have that potential. And also doing that throughout the rest of the draft. Obviously, you have to wait a good bit after those 2 picks, but I've been playing around with something that I'd like to term the proximity paradox.
Paradox psychosis?
And the more and more I think about it, I'm not sure it's going to line up by the numbers necessarily, but it might be more of a feeling thing, similar to the proximity principle, which is things that are closer together seem better, right? And I think that is part of it, obviously, is, just having back-to-back picks feels better, seems better. But I also do think that as the draft goes on, right, at the top end of the draft, no matter how far your picks are apart, obviously you're going to get pretty good players, top-end players, similar scoring players, right? But I think as the draft goes on, you'll notice that having back-to-back picks allows you to take advantage of similar type players. And when I say similar type players, similar scoring players who score similar amount of points, where the variance isn't so far off. Whereas I think later in drafts, when you have picks farther apart, it's harder to find those market inefficiencies and take advantage of them by selecting 2 guys who may have, fallen based on ADP, based on market value, whatever it is, and you take advantage of those because you don't have to wait, 5 more picks to get the guy that you wanted. So some of it, again, may be just mental, but I do think that there's a huge advantage to having those back-to-back picks as the draft goes on. That's just what I've found. I've found that I can take good advantage of it, and I enjoy drafting that way. So that's one thing I wanted to discuss is, a lot of these drafts, both of these drafts actually were different commissioners, but they both were done by Kentucky Derby draft, where you get to choose your draft selection based on a randomized order initially, right? So each time if I can't get up into the top 2, I don't want to be in the middle. So I just go and I select something at the back end. So I was able to pick from the 12th spot here. And the other draft that I'm going to review in this video is also from the 11th spot. So both were the back end of the draft where I get nearly back-to-back picks, and I'm able to kind of control my destiny as the draft goes on. That's another big part of it. I think, when you draft in the middle, you kind of really, really just have to take what comes to you because your picks are so far apart. Whereas I feel much better about having a couple options where my picks are going to be, and I can really just nail those down and move on. So I think that's just a big part of it for me, as well as where I can control my destiny a little bit more, having closer picks, having picks that are closer together. I wouldn't say this is the biggest deal, but this is how I navigate it, especially in Kentucky Derby, where I have my option and I can't really get up into the top end, where I can still have back-to-back picks, but have obviously a better option, which worked out well for me, as you can see here with my first 2 picks. I haven't even gotten into it yet. So, okay, draft position. I think I covered draft position pretty well here. I think the only other thing I could mention is the way I like to play it is just as a value hawk. That's really how I like to play any draft position I'm in, but specifically here, I think you can do it really well. And obviously, any part of the draft, you have to just take what comes to you. But I think you just have to not try to overthink it and reach and pick for players who are young just because they're young, and not go for the aged veterans. That is really not the way to do it. I like to take what comes to me, take the values, and generally it works out the best. So that's what I think I did here. And that's the last thing I'll say about draft position. I think what you'll notice here, and I'll kind of just combine the next 2 topics. So you'll notice that I didn't draft a running back until the 10th round.
Say that again.
And this is something that I'm noticing. I talked about this a little bit in other videos on my podcast, but drafting in the post double-digit rounds is really gross. It gets really tough. There's just not much that I want. So anything I can do to trade up, move up into those last couple rounds, whether it's 9, 10, 11 rounds, that's what I want to do. But I also noticed that I can kind of fade the running back position until those rounds and play kind of a zero hero running back strategy now. In both of these drafts, I really didn't find the opportunity to grab a running back early and play that hero running back strategy that I typically have liked to do in the past. So I've just entirely faded it, and I found it fairly successful. I think I have enough options there to kind of stream the position, and I can probably make a pretty good trade with the value I got otherwise. So you'll notice that's a big part of it. And I've talked about transition periods before, and I think running back's a big one that's going through it. So I don't really want to hold on to a ton of these running backs. The only ones I want are probably top 5 guys. And even with that, I thought there were better options at my first 2 picks, and then there was just no top 5 guys left by the time my 3rd pick got around. So at that point, I'm just going to, like I said, fade it entirely and move on and just go with wide receivers, tight ends, and quarterbacks, which are the most valuable and long-lasting positions in Dynasty. So that's my strategy. You can see that just from my first, 7 picks here are all quarterbacks and wide receivers. So that's a big part of it, is the transition periods, knowing that tight end is one that's going through it too, wanting to get some top options at that position, which I wish I did a better job at, but I just didn't quite have the opportunity to. Kelsey and Andrews went in the 3rd round before my next pick, and I wasn't willing to really jump up that high for those guys in this 1.25 tight end premium 12-team league. So knowing the transition periods, that quarterbacks, one that's going through it, you want to get those guys early. This one, again, you see the quarterbacks just went absolutely wild off the board early, so I did what I could here. But you'll see kind of my strategy in the other draft as well. So that's a big part of it, knowing the transition periods, understanding that the position groups that are going through an influx of new talent, and the ones that are pretty much aging out. And I think the running backs are that group, and I'm not willing to invest in a 1-year type rental to forego a bunch of dynasty value, which I think is what you do selecting a lot of these running backs, like the DeAndre Swifts and the Harrises and Josh Jacobs and Pollards and Stevensons, who are all players I do actually like. It's just kind of how I see the landscape right now. So with that said, let me just show you kind of how I navigated through these couple drafts, why I did what I did, and some of the options that I'm trying to avoid, or ones that I'm leaning more towards or that I'm targeting. So a big one here, I mean, this draft just fell kind of perfectly for me. I don't know how you let Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase get to the 112 and the 201, but that's what they did here. Bijan Robinson going at 111, Kyle Pitts at 19 is pretty strong and not something that I typically would do, but easy options for the 112, and that honestly it was kind of tough saying let me forego quarterback because I generally don't do that. I want to get one quarterback, but these two guys were just too good to pass up. So I did that, and you'll notice I did do a good bit of trading in this draft. So this one is definitely not, the typical example of what you may do or what you would see. And obviously there's a lot of movement that I can't really speak to. I'm not going to go through every trade, but I noticed that the quarterbacks were going, so I had to go back and get a top option. And I feel like Tua is a great value in the 3rd round if he's healthy, and I'm banking on that. I was able to get Tyreek Hill there coming back. I can't believe they let me get the stack so easily. Insane. So again, I'm not going to go through each pick, but you'll see that I just continually avoid these running backs, right? Which obviously I didn't have an option here, but Barkley at 4.6 is great value. And again, Barkley wouldn't be a terrible option to select where I selected Tyreek Hill, but I just think that Tyreek Hill may have a little bit more longevity and that I can get by with a different running back, right? So I avoided running back all the way until the 10th round, and I was able to go ahead and select David Montgomery, and I feel pretty good about that. And I think David Montgomery is just such a screaming value. Obviously, Jahmyr Gibbs is a stud, and he is the guy that they want to take over there, but David Montgomery has a pretty substantial deal over a couple years, and they obviously intend on using him in that Jamal Williams type role. I think he has plus value over Jamal Williams, so I think we're getting a pretty good player in the 10th round who has running back 2 upside, right? And running back 1 if there was an injury, obviously, but definitely running back 2 upside in the 11th round. The 11th round. Okay, insane. I was able to, and again, I made a lot of trades to kind of move around, go up and get Mike Williams, who I thought was a huge tier break here when you just see kind of the players that go after him in Mike Evans, Pacheco, Dalvin Cook, Kendre Miller, right? So I think there's a screaming value there. I traded up also to get David Njoku because, again, I didn't love my tight end situation. So I think Freiermuth and Njoku, really good upside there. Njoku is wild value in the 11th round, in my opinion, with the situation having Deshaun Watson being his quarterback. So nonetheless, onto my 0 running back strategy that you don't select one in the top, in the 4th, 5th round, which is what the typical running back strategy, the typical 0 running back strategy is you select a running back, like Nick Chubb, like Barkley, like one of these guys, you select one in the 4th round, 5th round, whatever it is, and then you wait until, like I did, post round 10. But for me, I just felt like I was getting more value and obviously some of this is out of my control where guys get selected before me, but I felt like with what the options were given, there was just a little bit more value in selecting the wide receivers who are a little bit younger and have more longevity, where I could get that replaceable running back value later in drafts. Antonio Gibson, round 14. Now, this was obviously before the renewed CMC hype from Riverboat Ron, but Antonio Gibson, round 14, after getting David Montgomery, those being my 2 starting running backs. Not the best, obviously, but you see with Jamar Chase, with Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, Debo, Calvin Ridley, Mike Williams, David Njoku, Freiermuth, I have a really, really good core of receivers who are going to just kind of keep me afloat no matter what happens. And those wide receivers definitely provide value above replacement and tons of upside over running backs I could have gotten the same range, in my opinion. J.K. Dobbins was one I passed up. That, you can argue there, but again, you just see how his value fluctuated so much. I'd rather have Calvin Ridley, who's going to Jacksonville with a stud quarterback. So I kind of finished off this 0 running back build with Jamal Williams in New Orleans, who I think, is a good kind of candidate for this. And then some rookie guys, Deuce Vaughn, Evan Hull, both guys who I think are direct backups in their respective teams. Late in the draft, I go and I get Pierre Strong, Joshua Kelly, and I like both of those picks as well for the 0 running back build. So that's how I approached it in this draft. Let's go on over to this other draft and show you how I did it there in a similar fashion. I do want everybody to be able to see the whole board before I highlight my team, so just quickly let you see this. I drafted from the 111 spot. 112 got picked before me, but I picked the closest thing to it after the top spots were selected. So similar to the strategy I've been talking about before this, right? This one I approached slightly differently as the draft unfolded much differently. You could see the 2 guys I got at 112 here went at 107 and 109 in Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. So much different draft. Justin Fields fell to the 111. I could have selected Deshaun Watson. I do like Deshaun Watson, but I'm taking a shot here on the youth and the upside with Justin Fields. And you can argue whatever you want with that, obviously, no problems. This was a much more traditional draft for me. I didn't move around nearly as much until, again, near those double-digit rounds where I felt like there's a massive tier break and you don't want to kind of select players in there. I may as well trade up if I can, and that's what I did there. So with this one, coming back around, this is actually a 2.0 tight end premium league. So getting Mark Andrews at the 2.02, I felt absolutely amazing about. I actually thought Kyle Pitts at 2.08 and Travis Kelce at 3.03 was just absurd value in a 2.0 tight end premium league. So love those values. Anyway, I start Justin Fields, Mark Andrews. I really like that start for here. And again, I've been going into the current landscape now. Prior to this, I was much, last year I was much more into the hero running back. I thought there was more opportunity for that. I thought that where the players were falling, it was a strategy you could really dive into. This year, I don't find it that way as much, at least for me. I find it much easier to kind of avoid all of those running backs and not buy into the 1-2 year windows and maybe just get younger and get much cheaper options later in the draft like I did here. And it worked out even better than the prior draft we looked at. So again, here I went tight end, wide receiver heavy. I focused on getting a couple top quarterback options. I thought Russell Wilson at 6.02 was amazing.
Whoa.
Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, Jerry Jeudy. Love that start. Deontay Johnson, just an absolute screaming value right now at 7.11 here. I mean, please, I will pass up Cam Akers all day. Miles Sanders, all of these running backs I want nothing to do with, right? Which I didn't have an option there, but I will pass all those up. DeAndre Swift, I don't want him in his new home. Dameon Pierce, I'm good. There'll be a new running back there drafted in the second, third round in a year or two. It's all good. I'd rather go with Calvin Ridley. Again, the upside, as you can see, I'm buying into him. Keenan Allen over Alvin Kamara was a calculated decision. I knew that I had the option to get Aaron Jones there. I figured that he would fall to me, and I actually really love – Aaron Jones in the 10th round, this is just telling you can do this zero running back strategy without having to select a running back in the 4th, 5th, 6th round where they typically tell you that's kind of the zero running back range. For me, this year, I think there's a lot more opportunity. You can see I got Aaron Jones and James Conner in the 12th round. So, I got 2 starting running backs in the 10th and 12th round. And yeah, I traded up my 11th round pick to go and get Jimmy Garoppolo because I wanted to have that third quarterback on this team. I just thought that was good value, and I was able to jump up there for, I don't know, it was like a 13th or something like that. Not sure how exactly I made all of these moves. I can't remember, but it was all, I don't think I gave up any future value, and all I did was try to move later picks to get in earlier. And I was successful in doing that. I really like that a lot. So a couple of the other late round options I did for the zero running back build were Ezekiel Elliott, who we don't know where he's going yet, but I like the value here personally. I think maybe I could have gone one of these Jalen Warrens or something like that. Jalen Warren's a good value, but I like Zeke there. Zamir White, Pierre Strong, another one that was on the other team, but you could see, just going for these upside running backs, the direct backups, guys who should develop maybe into year 2. Those are the kind of options I want behind my Aaron Jones and James Conner in these zero running back builds. So I thought these 2 drafts really highlighted some of the concepts I was talking about in terms of keeping the transition periods in mind, especially with running back right now, where if you can avoid drafting a lot of the running backs outside of the top 5 range, you're likely to sustain a lot more value going to year 2 of your dynasty league. Now, there's definitely opportunity with some of these running backs, and if you're not at the back end like I am at the 111, you can definitely have opportunities like you see right here. IDUC ended up getting Jonathan Taylor and Saquon Barkley after Jamar Chase and Lamb after doing some movement, whatever. There's definitely some opportunity to do builds like that, and they'll definitely be successful, especially for, a year early on, whatever it is. But for me, I think I can get by without investing in players who are going to decline in value more quickly and invest in players who are going to either sustain or increase in value over time while also fulfilling the point totals I need from the running back position. And I think this was a really good draft to show how to do that with Aaron Jones and James Conner at the, post double-digit round area. But for me, try to avoid those double-digit round areas, get up in earlier areas, try to trade for the players where you see tier breaks in those areas like I did. Avoid running backs at as much as possible. Obviously, there's areas where you take some of these guys, but avoid running back as much as possible. And it is possible to do 0 running back builds and be super successful right now, in my opinion, and gain tons of value during the offseason that you can move around and trade for running backs as you approach, the NFL season when things become a little more clear. I think right now we don't know exactly where everything is, where everything falls with the running back position. There's a lot of fluctuation with it right now. I hope this review and strategy session going over a couple startup drafts from the back end of the draft were helpful for some people. I'm sure you're getting into startup drafts right now. If they're Kentucky Derby and you can select your draft position, I think this can be beneficial if you can't get up to the top. It depends how you want to approach it. But for me, I think in the current Dynasty landscape, the back end gives you a lot of opportunity to avoid some of these landmine positions and really just stack up value, be a value hawk, see what falls to you, take all of the goodies and let everybody else reach and move around and do all that. Just move around where you see fit, move around where you see those tier breaks, like I said, and you can jump up and do that around those 10, 11, 12 rounds where in the first 9 I really want to get as much value as I can and not give up too many draft picks. So with that in mind, you can kind of do that pre-draft, post-draft, depends on the group that you can do that pre-draft or when the draft starts, depends on the group that you're dealing with. With all that said, I really hope you guys enjoy what we're doing here at the Dynasty Football Factory YouTube channel. Please subscribe. Please follow me on Twitter at WillieBeemanDFF. Sign up for DynastyFootballFactory.com. Become a member. Join our Discord. We have some great stuff going on. Our writers are amazing. Connect with them. All that good stuff. So thanks again and tune in next time. Until next time, DFF Army.